dawn slowly breaks over a wild, untouched valley. No paved roads, no car horns, no phones, no Wi-Fi, no schedules. Only the wind howling through stone cliffs, and the quiet footsteps of bare feet leaving a cave. They weren't brutish cavemen, swinging clubs and dragging women by the hair like in old comic books. They were our ancestors, the very first humans who paved the way for civilization. They lived during what we now call the Paleolithic, the Old Stone Age, a span of time almost impossible to comprehend, from 2.6 million years ago to around 12,000 years ago. In all that time, no cities were built, no writing invented, no crops planted. And yet, humans lived. They loved, they fought, and they created. Don't mistake it for a backward age. In truth, it was one of the most sustainable and adaptable periods in human history. They crafted tools sharper than surgical knives from stone. They kept fire burning through the night, hunted beasts larger than buses, and etched their world onto cave walls through art and symbols. They had no books, but carried collective memory. No doctors, but understood the healing power of plants. No schools, yet children learned through watching, mimicking, and surviving together. So what did a day in their life look like? What did they eat? What did they do? Where did they live? And what did they think about as they looked up at the stars, unclouded by city lights? We're about to go back in time, not just to see how our ancestors lived, but to ask a deeper question. Who are we when all the modern things are stripped away? Because before you were an engineer, a student, or a social media addict, you were once Paleolithic, barefoot, spear in hand, facing the wild, and surviving the Ice Age. Part 2. A typical day. No alarms, no deadlines, no wall calendars, only the sun and survival. As the first light pierced through the cave entrance or rustled leaves, the day began. The breath of the early risers steamed in the cold morning mist. First task, check the ashes from the night before. If there were still glowing embers, they would gently coax the fire back to life. That vital flame that kept them warm, cooked their food, and warded off predators. Because if the fire went out, the group could freeze or become prey themselves. Then they scattered. Adults divided tasks without a schedule, without a manager. One group followed fresh tracks in the mud, hunting for meat. Another headed to the stream, hauling water, checking fish traps, or digging for crabs. Others gathered fruits, dug up roots, collected firewood, ears alert for every unfamiliar rustle. And the children? They weren't stuck in classrooms. They learned with their eyes, their hands, and their scraped knees. At noon, under the scorching sun, they took shelter in the shade of trees or under cool rock ledges. This resting spot became their workshop, where they sharpened spearheads, patched leather pouches, rewove fishing baskets. If the hunters returned with a kill, there was no time for celebration. They would immediately butcher, roast, or dry the meat, because without refrigeration, food couldn't wait. When the sun dipped below the horizon, the group gathered around the fire. It wasn't just a meal, it was the soul of the community. They ate. They told stories of the hunt, taught their children how to recognize a claw mark from a leopard, sang a moon-calling chant, massaged the tired feet of elders, and quietly planned for tomorrow. Each day passed like this, neither rushed nor idle, but steady and rhythmic, like a song of survival. They weren't busy, they weren't free. Because in the Paleolithic world, every act was a choice between connection and extinction. Part 3. What did they eat to survive? Food, for Paleolithic humans, didn't come from a grocery store. It hid deep in the bushes, beneath hard-packed earth, drifted through icy streams, or ran very fast and knew how to fight back. To survive, they had to become ecologists, explorers, and apex predators all in one. They weren't picky. If it was edible, they ate it. Wild berries, roots, mushrooms, raw honey, bird eggs, insects, snails, lizards. Even the marrow from frozen animal bones found days or weeks after death. Every meal was an adventure. One group near the coast invented grass-woven nets, fish hooks made from bone, and stone traps placed along river flows. Another group on the plains mastered the art of tracking deer, antelope, and bison, sometimes digging pits or herding animals toward ravines through collective shouts and coordinated movement. They knew which season to gather leaves, when to dig roots, and how to detoxify poisonous plants by roasting or soaking them in water. They didn't have medical textbooks, but encoded within their brains were hundreds of thousands of years of knowledge about food, toxins, and healing, passed down through stories and scars. Modern science has analyzed the teeth of prehistoric humans and found traces of more than 40 different plant species, including several with medicinal properties. Some were even natural painkillers, like the aspirin of the wild. When winter came, they dried meat on hot rocks, wrapped it in animal hide, and buried it in snow pits, creating natural refrigerators to keep the group fed through the cold months. There were no calorie counts, no keto diets, but they understood something simple and vital. To survive, you had to share. The meat from a hunt didn't belong to the strongest. It was divided among the elderly, the children, and the wounded. Because in the wild, survival alone isn't freedom. It's a death sentence. It was cooperation, not conquest, that kept our species alive. Part 4, Tools. From crude stone to crafted art. If fire was the heart of early human life, then tools were its outstretched hands reaching into the world. Without tools, they couldn't hunt, butcher, or survive the brutal winters. At first, a tool was just a stone, smashed to create a sharp edge that could cut through animal hide. But over time, what seemed crude became a masterpiece of engineering and evolutionary thinking. Around 1.76 million years ago, the Acheulean hand axe emerged, a bifacially flaked tool with a perfectly symmetrical edge, sharp enough to butcher elephants, crack bones, and still hold up after dozens of blows. It wasn't just functional. It was beautiful, efficient, and looked like it was designed by a master engineer lost in the wild. And they didn't stop at stone. They learned to shape wood, bone, antler, and mammoth ivory into fishhooks, spear tips, sewing needles, flutes, traps, and even jewelry. At Schonen in Germany, archaeologists discovered 2-meter-long wooden spears carved to perfection, balanced at the center, the Paleolithic equivalent of modern Olympic javelins. It's proof they understood leverage, momentum, and aerodynamics without ever learning physics. By the Upper Paleolithic, a wave of innovation surged. They produced skin scrapers, chisels, hand mallets, fine points, even grooved measuring sticks, all from flint, bone, and mammoth ivory, combining toughness, flexibility, and precision. These tools weren't made for show. Each had a purpose: to solve a specific survival problem: slicing tendons, skinning hides, punching holes, carving roots, stitching garments, butchering meat, cracking marrow bones. What they held in their hands was never just a rock. It was the distilled essence of creativity, instinct, and intelligence. So, the next time you marvel at your sleek smartphone with 3 cameras, remember this: your ancestors once crafted surgical-grade cutting tools from raw stone by hand, with nothing but focus, skill, and the will to survive. Art 5. Shelter. More than just caves. When we think of prehistoric people, we often picture them huddled in a dark cave, crouched by a flickering fire, drawing animals on the wall. That image isn't wrong, but it's far from complete. The truth is, they lived anywhere they could survive. Caves were just one option, and not every place had caves that were large enough, dry enough, or safe enough. On open plains, Paleolithic people built long shelters using wooden posts for support, animal hides for roofing, and dry grass as insulation and fencing. At the Terra Amata site in France, archaeologists discovered the remains of a 15-meter-long shelter, with clear evidence of a hearth, sleeping area, and tool-making zone, dated to 380,000 years ago. In Mezheritch, Ukraine, They found houses constructed from mammoth skulls and bones, arranged in a circular pattern around a central fire. The roofs were draped with hides, the floors covered in straw, scattered around, footprints, bone fragments, ashes, the traces of a living, breathing home. The layout of these shelters was smart and purposeful. In the center, the fire. Around it, beds, tool-making areas, meat processing zones, and food storage corners. Trash wasn't dumped randomly. They created designated waste zones away from the living space, perhaps the earliest form of waste management in human history. Every shelter was a masterpiece of adaptation. If it rained, they built drainage channels. If it got cold, they reinforced hides and blocked the wind. If they had to move, they packed up the tent, slung the tools, and walked. Everything was portable, but never random. Whether it was a cave or a hide tent, permanent or seasonal, these places were never just shelters. They were homes. Places where people loved, gave birth, mourned the dead, and passed down stories across generations. No bricks, no cement, just fire, people, and a deep sense of B. Part 6. Family, Children, and Community Care. In the wild, prehistoric world, where predators lurked and a cold night could kill, a person didn't survive because of strength alone. They survived because of community. Paleolithic society had no daycare centers, no nursing homes, but it had extended families, groups who lived together, shared everything, and protected one another. Children weren't separated out for education. They learned with their eyes, hands, and feet. They learned to recognize firewood by its scent, knowing which logs burned longest. They learned to hear the sound of an animal stepping softly on dry leaves. They learned how to grip a stone blade and not drop it on their own toes. Their first words rose alongside the clang of stone axes, the rhythm of pounding seeds, the hum of oral stories, in a world where every sound was a lesson in survival. The elderly weren't seen as burdens. They were living libraries. They knew which plants healed wounds, which winds brought storms, which birds signaled honey nearby. They didn't hunt, but passed on wisdom no book could ever contain. And if someone was injured, crippled, limping, blind in one eye, they weren't left behind. Archaeologists have found skeletal remains showing severe injuries that healed over years, even decades. Such people only lived that long because someone cared enough to help them live. This proves one thing: our ancestors knew how to care, to sacrifice, and to love. When a woman gave birth, the whole group stepped in. A common scene: a man sharpening a spear, a toddler playing with stones beside him, and an old woman chewing soft herbs into food for the new mother. There was no line between raising children and working, no line between family and tribe, because in the heart of the wilderness, no one survives alone. Only by living for each other could they all live at all. Part 7. Society and Communication. They had no villages, no towns, no districts, no borders, but they had something even more important: the band, a community that survived together. Each band typically consisted of 20 to 30 people, small enough for everyone to know each other's face, yet large enough to share all the essential tasks: hunters, gatherers, firekeepers, childcare, storytellers. They could be siblings, spouses, cousins, or simply people who chose to live and die for each other. And they weren't isolated like closed-off tribes. Quite the opposite. They connected, they exchanged. Archaeologists have discovered shell beads in mountainous regions hundreds of kilometers from any ocean. Flint tools, made from rare stone, appear in areas with no natural flint deposits at all. This tells us something profound. Paleolithic humans maintained long-distance networks, crossing forests, plains, and even glacial terrain to meet, trade, and share. They had no written language, but they spoke, and when words failed, they still communicated. With eyes, gestures, rhythms of stone, painted symbols, dancing bodies, drum beats, and whistles echoing across the land. When two groups met, they shared fire, shared food, sometimes shared partners, and always shared stories. They might hunt a mammoth together or gather around a fire for a night of singing and dancing, where no one had a nationality, only the universal language of survival and kinship. They understood something essential. If one person falls ill, the group weakens. If one band disappears, a vital link in the human web is lost. Communication wasn't just about survival. It was about belonging. Amid brutal cold, predator attacks, and endless storms, the simple knowledge that I am not alone was what pulled people close. And that, perhaps, was the first spark of civilization. Not a city, not a law, but a group huddled around a fire, listening, speaking, and choosing to live together. Part 8. Culture, Art, and Belief. Paleolithic humans didn't just live to survive. They lived to feel, to remember, to connect with the invisible. Amid endless rain and freezing winter nights, they still found time to paint on cave walls. Not with store-bought pigments, but with red ochre, charred ash, and ground minerals, mixed by hand with animal fat, blood, and spit. At Blombos Cave in South Africa, traces of red ochre paint date back over 100,000 years. Proof that the desire to express through images is one of the oldest instincts in our species. And then came Lascaux, France, an explosion of Paleolithic art. On the cave walls, mammoths, bison, deer, and wild horses leap into motion, depicted with shading, perspective, and depth. You don't see primitives with sticks. You see a Renaissance painter lost in prehistory. But they didn't paint for fun. They may have painted for rituals before the hunt, to preserve the memory of a legendary animal, or to honor the spirit of the creature they had slain. Some images go further. Humans with animal heads, handprints left like signatures, repeating abstract symbols. These reveal a belief in the unseen world, a religion with no gods yet, but full of mystery and reverence. And yes, they had music. In Germany, archaeologists discovered bone flutes dating back 43,000 years, capable of playing a 5-note scale, just like traditional folk music. Combined with drums made from hide, wooden percussion, clapping, and chanting, they created rituals, festivals, and lullabies in the middle of the forest. They were still human, like us, but in the heart of that wilderness, they painted light onto stone and sang names into the dark. It was through language, ritual, and symbol that they rose above instinct and began the journey to become. Part 9. Lessons from 2 million years of survival. They had no phones, no internet, no social media, no AI, no wind turbines, no nuclear power plants. But they knew how to connect, with a glance, with a shared piece of meat, with an embrace around the fire as the cold crept in. They had no digital technology, but they carried living knowledge, passed down through hands, through stories, through carved stones and painted walls. They had no rice fields, but ate wild, nutritious, chemical-free food. They didn't live in high-rise buildings, but in small communities where everyone knew each other's name, shared the work, cared for the sick, and raised the children together. They survived things we only see in disaster movies: ice ages, volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, years-long droughts, predators taller than buses, and yet they endured. Not because they were the strongest, not because they were the most numerous, but because they were creative, cooperative, and resilient. They used stone, but crafted it with the precision of engineers. They lived in tents, but knew how to organize space, manage waste, protect their water sources. They didn't write history, but left behind a spiritual legacy of art, music, symbols, and ceremony. Today, we pride ourselves on how far we've come, but the farther we go, the more we risk forgetting what truly matters, living in harmony with nature, with each other, and with our human essence. Our ancestors didn't need a sustainability agenda because they lived sustainably for 2.6 million years, long before nations, religions, or industries existed. So maybe the greatest lesson they left us isn't just how to survive, but how to live without losing one another and without losing ourselves. We, the people of the 21st century, live in a world of brilliant lights, yet we often feel lost in the dark. Every day, we're pulled into a whirlwind of work, news, and notifications. And we forget where we came from and what allowed humans to endure for millions of years. Perhaps by looking back at how our ancestors lived, we'll realize real connection doesn't require technology. Compassion doesn't need contracts. Creativity doesn't need diplomas. And survival, sometimes, only requires a hand to hold, a fire to share, and a piece of meat offered without hesitation. If you want to keep exploring the stories buried for tens of thousands of years, if you believe history is not just in books, but a mirror for today and tomorrow, subscribe to follow the next journeys, where we walk through prehistory together, understand humanity, and rediscover ourselves. Because sometimes, to move toward the future, we must first look back to the people who walked through the wild so that we could be here today.